Welcome to Salt Session. My name is Kiramode, and this is going to be part 2 of comboing. In part 1, I talked about offensive comboing and how to play by the book. This is more defensive comboing and how to use the defensive hierarchy. So a couple videos ago, I talked about combo values and defensive hierarchy, which I'll just sort of be referencing throughout this entire video. So if you haven't watched that video, it probably makes sense to see that first, just so you can be familiar. But even if you don't, you can just kind of follow along with what I'm saying, and you'll kind of get there by at least the halfway point of this video. So to get things started, we're going to assume you're against good players. So against bad players, defensive comboing becomes way easier because they're giving you the ability to outplay them every time that they do it. And if you watch my last video, the short synopsis of offensive comboing is you should never do it. So for this video, we're going to assume that whoever you're playing against is just good. Now, one of the nice things about this game is that the values of attackers are all, for the most part, static, right? Any attacker you're going to deal with is, for the most part, either a 15k, a 20k, or 25k. It's very rare for a card to ever be above a 25k. And also anything below a 15k is usually irrelevant because your guys are all going to be 15ks and above. So you don't really need to defend against it, and it's not really worth talking about. So you only kind of need to think about threats in terms of, are they 15ks, are they 20ks, or are they 25ks? Now, in card games, the rule of thumb is that, actually, rule of thumb is probably the wrong way to put it, more like the golden rule, is that whenever you're dealing with a threat, right? So if your opponent says, I'm playing this card, and this card's going to do something bad to you, in order to deal with that card, you want to deal with it in whatever is the most efficient way possible. In other words, you want to use your worst card possible to deal with that threat, because you want to save your best cards for the strongest threats. Now, when we talk about that for DBS purposes, the defensive hierarchy is basically big blockers, combo, chump blockers, negates. So because you're using your big blockers first, you're effectively letting the attack through, right? You're saying, here, you swung with a 15k, I'm going to use my 20k blocker to get in the way. The moment you do that, you're now entering the combo range, right? Whenever you use your big blocker, you're effectively just using combo, but it's more of a redirected combo. Same thing with Vegito. If you play Vegito, he's effectively just like an all-around blocker, so they're just swinging into him. And you're still going to enter a situation where you're going to have to combo, right? Or you're going to have to decide whether or not you combo, and then sometimes you're swinging at your life. So there is actually one form of defense that is below the blocker, but nobody ever thinks about it, and it's just letting shit go. And oftentimes that's the right decision. So if you're not awakened and somebody attacks your life, you should never defend that shit. You should just always let it go. Unless it's crit, but crit might just be a separate video entirely. If somebody attacks you, you just let it go. And you're going to let that go until you hit your tipping point, right? Once you hit your tipping point, that's when you actually care to defend for the most part. But before you hit your tipping point, you're just letting everything go. Like, there's never a card you'd rather lose in your hand than just take a card from your life and add it to your hand. It's just not worth it. And then similarly, there's certain cards on the table that once they've done their thing, you don't give a shit about them anymore. An example of this would be, I like playing Green Gohan a lot because he comes into play and murders a 4-drop or lower. And then usually you'll send him in a chump attack to go hit whatever. Once he's done that, he doesn't do anything anymore. So if my opponent attacks him, he's just a 15k body on the table. I'm probably going to let him go. Like, there's not that many 5k cards that are in my hand that I would rather not have in my hand as opposed to the 15k on the table. Like, that's kind of dumb to prefer the 15k. Because all these cards that are 5ks, they do things that are important. And it's the same thing with like a Digging Deep Vegeta, right? If Digging Deep has already done his thing to help you awaken, you don't really care if he dies at that point. He's done his job. So there are plenty of situations where your opponent is attacking, and whatever they're attacking is just so meaningless in terms of value that you're not even going to try to stop it. You're just going to let it go. But outside of that, that's when you maybe start thinking about things. So when you have to decide if you're going to combo out of something, you have to basically weigh the value of the card on the table versus the value of the card in your hand. And usually you'll have a bunch of dead cards. Or not dead, but just cards that don't do much, right? So if you have self-awakening cards in your hand, but you're already awakened, all those cards are generally 5Ks, so they basically become 5K combo fodder. So when your opponent attacks 15K on 15K, 20 on 20 or whatever, that's where you just throw away the 5K because you're not playing that card anyways. And that's where you might actually say, you might even consider burning that card to save like a Freehon or something. I would generally advise against that because you still want to save that 5K for a different attack, but at the very least you can sort of justify it if the card's not doing shit else in your hand. So that's like the first step, is just understanding what's more valuable, the shit on the table or the guy in your hand. As you get higher in terms of the threat levels will determine whether or not you want to keep going on that line of thinking, because if someone's attacking you 20K on 15K, right? So if they're 5K above, so whatever guy you have on the table, they swing 5K above naturally, and then they say no combo, you have less options now. So you can burn a 10K, but if you're not playing SS3, 10Ks cost a lot of money, so you might not have it. An Unbreakable Goku you can use, so at that point, that's a card that, it's a 2-carder, but you get a card back, so like you're still burning the same 1 card effectively that you would burn otherwise. You probably don't want to use a super combo unless you have no more options. And then as they get higher, then you don't want to combo at all. In particular, if somebody's coming 25K on your 15K, you should just not even try to combo out of that, because in order to combo out of that, you're going to have to burn a 10K and a 5K, and that's just too much value. Like, I don't know what your 15K card is, but it's highly unlikely that card is going to be worth justifying burning 2 cards, possibly even 3 cards to get out of that situation. It's just not worth it at the end of the day, so you just let that card go. And this is where the negates come in. So as a general rule of thumb, if I'm going to combo out of something, like if you declare an attack and I'm going, and I have it in my mind that I'm going to try to defend whatever card is on the table, or I'm going to try to defend my life that is on the board. If you're swinging even, or you're swinging 5K above, I generally just look at my hand and decide, but for the most part, I'll go into combo, because I know if you're even, it only costs me a 5K, and if you're 5K above, it costs me a 10K, and presuming that I have the mana for it, it's not that hard to get out of that. But if you're coming 10K above, I'm just losing too much value. And that's where the chump blockers or the negates come in. Because at that point, you're just losing 1 card, right? And these 1 cards are really valuable. But knowing that you can deal with such a monstrously stronger attacker than your defender, burning, like just saying 1 card to stop this is way better than your other option, which is potentially burning 3 cards to stop it. And that's why they are higher on the hierarchy. And of course, you would value the blocker over the negate, just because, as we discussed in the last video, if your blocker gets killed, you don't have that option anymore. So your negates you want to save for the absolute latest, just because your opponent can't really fuck with them and they're going to stop the attack. Your blockers, they're really useful too, at least your chump blockers, because they probably don't cost you anything and they just kill a guy. And in particular, Yajirobe, that guy just murders a dude too, so it's like a 2-for-1 special as far as that guy is concerned. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I deal with it. But that's just the base level, right? That I think that's pretty easy to understand, and for the most part, I think players get this. Like when I see people defensive comboing, I do see a number of mistakes. I don't think players' mistakes are as egregious as their offensive comboing. But for the most part, the only mistake I'll see with defensive comboing is I'll see players use the wrong cards. So oftentimes you'll swing 15K on 15K or 20K on 20K, and what a player will do is instead of pitching a 5K, they'll burn an Unbreakable Goku or they'll burn a super combo. And the problem with doing this is that even if you don't agree with me that Unbreakables are worth 2 and super combos are worth 3 cards, the problem with doing them is even if you don't believe that, you're still wasting value, right? Because there's going to be a time later in the game where you're going to need a 10k for value to combo out of something, and now you have less of them or none of them because you pissed them away in spots where a 5k can do. So you don't want to find yourself in a situation where they combo even on you. You throw a 10k to get out of it, and then later they're swinging 5k above you. Now you need that 10k, and now you only have 5k, so you have to burn 2 5ks to get out of it. Like, that's the kind of situations you don't want to find yourself in. So I see players fuck that up a lot, where they don't understand that if you over combo early, it can really punish you later. But that's still even then kind of smaller potatoes, because a lot of times you're still only losing one card. So as long as you're not using a super combo in that situation, you're probably fine. And again, the reason people do this is they're not thinking this way. They're thinking, I'm going to lose a card one way or the other to defend this attack. One draws me a card, one doesn't. I'm going to do the one that draws me a card. Like, that's as far as people's line of thinking goes. So if you can kind of weed yourself off that line of thinking, you'll probably be better off for it. But then there's another layer of defensive comboing that I think is more nuanced, and what actually is where people make more mistakes. And it's that when you choose if you're going to defensive combo, figuring out whether the card on the table is more valuable than your card that you're going to use to protect it, that's really easy. And figuring out roughly the order, in other words, evens and 5Ks, you kind of let them through. 10Ks that are, the cards that are 10K above, like the 25Ks, those ones you negate and or just don't even bother comboing. That's easy shit. Like that's stuff that you can write out a flowchart in 2 minutes and then bring it to you for games and you're good. What's harder to understand is the sort of opportunity cost of defending certain cards. So one of the examples of this would be when you have one battle card and your leader card. So for example, let's say you're playing SS3 and you're awakened, but let's say your opponent has no triple strike. So you know your tipping point, like if they have double strike, your tipping point is 3 life. You just don't want to get below that, but you're at 4. So if your opponent has the ability to make, say, 3 attacks in the turn, so they can make 3 15k attacks, and you have a 15k guy on the board that's tapped, and your leader, who's at 4 life, here's how this can go. You can try to defend your 15k over and over again, or you can let them go and let them swing at your life. And here's roughly how this will play out. If you defend your 15k 3 times, you just lost 3 cards. Now, maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not. But it costs you 3 cards to keep that one guy on the table. On the other hand, let's say that they come back. Like, they swing with the first attack at your 15k. They say no combo. You say no combo. Card dies. Second attack comes to your leader. They say no combo. You're just definitely taking the life there. So now you're up a card, right? And then they swing with the next 15k. And they say no combo. But at this point, you're at your tipping point, so you actually have to defend it. So basically, that card you took for life, you're just going to use it to defend that attack. At this point, you're just more or less breaking even, right? You lost the life, and you lost Vegeta, or whatever your 15k would be. But that's it. Like, your actual hand size isn't affected. Like, you lose a little bit in terms of tipping point. Again, you lose a little bit on your board. But you're actually in a pretty much the same situation you were beforehand. But if you actually spent 3 5Ks to defend that one 15k body that you have on the table, that 15k body has a lot of work to do, because in order to recuperate that value that you lost earlier, it's going to have to do a lot. And oftentimes, it's just not going to do that. And so it's generally best to just let them go, because by letting that 15k body go, your opponent now has to attack a less desirable target from their end. And you now have the opportunity to gain a little bit of value off of it. Another situation when this comes up is, let's say you have Vegito. Right? Vegito right now, I use him a lot in my examples, mainly because a lot of people are on SS3 and a lot of people play Vegito. But in this situation, let's say you have like this 20k guy that makes it so you can't attack leaders. But then you have like sprinkled out a bunch of 15k dudes, or maybe even just one 15k guy. If you let your 15ks go, right? If you just kind of like, they attack at your 15ks and you just let them go, their next option is they have to attack a 20k, and defending a 20k is significantly easier than defending a 15k. So by allowing your 15ks to die, you're now forcing your opponent to attack a much stronger defender. And by attacking a much stronger defender, you now have the ability to potentially gain value off of them. And that's like another thing to consider there too. The last point is you don't want to defend your guy if you have no chance at saving them. So me personally, I play Kefla in my deck. And what I've noticed with Kefla is people just have no clue how to defend against her. So when I play against Kefla, my general rule of thumb is you either negate her because she's above the 10k, or just let her shit through. I never try to combo out of a Kefla because I just know I'm going to lose so much value on that it's just never worth it. But what I notice people do is sometimes what they'll do is they just don't know how to deal with the fact that she attacks again. So sometimes what will happen, and like this is, I just scratch my head when I see this, is I'll attack with Kefla, so she's a 30k. And I'll be swinging at a 20k body. Like maybe I'm swinging at like a topo or something. So it's 30k on 20k. And then they're like, okay, I'm going to super combo, and then I'm going to burn a 5k, and now my topo's safe. And then it's like, all right, cool. She attacks again. Now she's 35. And she's going at the same topo. And then you can kind of see the opponent thinking in their head, and they're just thinking like, am I going to burn 2 super combos here to save this topo? And they just kind of hemming and hawing, and they just let them go. At that point, they're like, fuck it. Just let it go. Because like at that point, it's hit them that it's not worth it to defend it. And that's fine. They made the right decision the second time around, but now you have this problem of like, why don't you just let them go? Right? Because you just lost 15k worth of combo power from your hand to protect this topo on the first attack just for him to die on the second attack. And so if you weren't going to defend him all the way, why'd you even defend him in the first place? And that's a more obvious example, but sometimes you see this with like shorter examples. Sometimes an opponent will be able to generate 4 or 5 15k attacks, right? And they're all just coming at the same 15k body, whatever that 15k body may be. And like the opponent will defend that 15k body like 3 times, and then on the 4th attack, that's when they're like, fuck it. And they just let them go. And at that point, it's like, if you're not going to defend him all the way, if you're not willing to defend this guy all the way up until the point where your opponent, is willing to attack, then don't defend him at all. Like at that point, it's not worth it. If you're going to let him go at the end anyways, let him go early so that way they can attack a worse target and you can potentially recoup a little bit of value. The other part of this, and this is where I would say to defend, is there's situations where the guy they're attacking is actually the most valuable dude. Valuable dude on your end, like the guy that you want them to attack. So if they're attacking the guy that you want them to continue attacking, it actually then makes sense to combo. So sometimes where this happens is you'll have a guy that your opponent just doesn't want to see on the table. So an example of this, like I play Frost in my deck. So Frost is a 15k. So let's say I have Frost, but I'm also at my tipping point for my leader. So my leader and Frost are both 15ks. But I'm going to defend either one of them. So if my opponent attacks my leader, I'm going to burn 5k to stop that no matter what. So if he sends 5 attacks on my leader, I'm spending 5 cards to get out of that. Similarly, if they send 5 attacks to Frost, I'm probably just going to spend 5 cards to block it, because I know the other option is actually just as bad, if not possibly worse. So that's another part to consider in this as well. So if losing the guy that they're attacking would lead them to attack a better target for you, you just got to let the guy go. But if the target is actually the more valuable target, that's the guy you want them swinging at, it's more incentivized to actually just keep the combo going. And it hurts, but you have to have that ahead of time. And I don't think people plan this out. I think a lot of times people, they think of every decision individually, and they're not thinking about it as a whole picture. Like they don't think, okay, if I'm going to defend this 15k body, I might have to defend the same 15k body 4 times this turn. Is it worth it to each time burn a card to do that? I don't think they're thinking that way. I think they're thinking each individual case, like, oh, they attack a 15k body. Well, this 15k body is better than this 5k, so I'll burn the 5k. And then they swing again, you're like, well, he's still better than this other 5k, so I'll burn that 5k. And then they swing again, and then you're like, I'm kind of out of 5Ks. Maybe I spend this super combo, and then it doesn't feel as good. And then they swing the fourth time, and then you're like, fuck, I can't. You just kind of look at it. You're like, I can't justify this anymore. I can't keep spending this to save this dumbass card. And it just takes them too long. They're not thinking that, yeah, if I defend him once, I have to defend him again, and I just don't want to keep defending him. And they don't know when to cut bait early. And that's part of what can get you a little bit of value later, is if you can identify when you got to cut bait on a card and when you really need to actually defend a card, it'll make you a better player. And then also just, when it comes to using the defensive hierarchy, don't piss away your negates. Like, negates are what's going to pull you ahead long term, because if games go long, the big cards are coming. Like the big 25k cards, the 7-drop Fu that comes from Overrealm, the Beerus, the Dragon Fist, the Keflas. Like, these cards will show up eventually. And what you don't want to find yourself doing is you don't want to burn your negates on random, even amount attacks or 5k attacks. Like the early game attacks, you don't want to use your negates there, because when the late game comes and you really, really need these big catch-all answers, you're not going to have them. And so the player that's more judicious, that's going to just use the 5Ks, use the 10Ks, and just save their most valuable cards for when the bigger threats come, they're the ones that are going to pull ahead towards the end of the game, because they've made sure to deal with it in the most efficient manner. You just always want to use your least valuable resource to deal with the threat, so that way when you need your valuable resources, you have them. And a lot of times it doesn't matter. When I talk about offensive comboing, when I talk about defensive comboing, understand that all this stuff is kind of within the margins. Like, if you're playing heavy aggro decks, like if you're playing Hirudegarn versus Hirudegarn, none of this shit matters. Because in those games, they're much more decided by just who draws more super combos, because the games end on turn 2 or turn 3, that it doesn't matter. But when you get to longer games, when you get to games where you have more decision points, that's where these decisions make all the difference. Because when there's a bunch of decision points in the game, it's going to really come down to, can you save a card here? Can you save a card there? And if one person isn't trying to maximize the amount of cards that they have in their deck, and the other one is, the one that is going to find a way to get a 3 to 4 card advantage. And that doesn't mean much early. That again, when you're at 12 cards versus 9 cards, it doesn't matter. But as you keep attacking each other, the cards are going to dwindle. Like, just naturally playing a threat and just keep trading haymakers with each other, the card pool will go down, and you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're both below 6 cards. But if you're the guy that has 6 and the guy that has 3, that's how you win the game. Like, that's how you grind someone into the dirt and beat them. But in order to do that, you have to be careful. It means on offensive combos, you never do it. And on defensive combos, you need to be as greedy as you can possibly be in terms of letting the hits that your opponent is attacking and you can get away with taking, letting those happen, and using the worst card possible to deal with their threats, even if it isn't the most immediately valuable. Like, short term, using a super combo to defend something will always be better than burning a 5k, because you're drawing an extra card. Long term, it kills you, though. And just understanding that can make you a better player. And again, this one's tougher. I understand that defensive comboing is not something that you can get overnight, but players already do a fairly good job of this, because it's kind of hard to fuck up, right? You only have to know how to deal with 10Ks, how to deal with 20, how to deal with 25Ks. And if you can kind of figure those out, it makes more sense. And because a lot of these games don't go long, players for the most part don't have to deal with the decisions of what happens when my opponent can spit out 4 or 5 attacks that are relevant and we're playing the board control game. How do I decide if I want to defend this guy repeatedly? Like, these are questions players for the most part don't have to ask, so they don't really find themselves in situations where they can get caught by it. But if you want to get better, if you want to find yourself in a situation where you can win those types of battles, this is the kind of information that can help. This is Salt Session. I'm Kiramode. See you next time.